Hello and welcome. Thank you for finding us. A little bit different on this conversation, and you'll see it will become apparent why, as we get into the conversation, why you're just looking at still pictures of both of us rather than video conversation as normal. So it means you can listen to this while you're doing other things and not have to look at the screen, I guess. But this evening, I am joined by Tish for today's conversation, and I'll let Tish introduce herself. So welcome, Tish, first of all, and do you want to give people a little introduction to who you are?
Thank you for having me. I am on Twitter as still Tish, and for those of you that don't know, I have a trans-identified son who is really a gay male, right down to loving Judy Garland. Apologies for the stereotype. And at 14, he started to identify as trans. I kept him away from the medical sector until he was of age and I no longer had any control. So now, unfortunately, he is actually medicalising.
Yeah. So as we said before, these conversations, although we're talking about a wide range of stuff to do with these issues, what I'm keen to do is talk about things that gay men won't have heard or gay men need to hear in particular. So I was really interested to talk to you about this from the point of view of the mother of a gay man or a gay male. I mean, all of us, I think, as gay men, will recognize the kind of it's almost like a cliche about your mother always knows before you do kind of thing. So I'm keen to kind of talk a bit more about that kind of situation, but also the other things that kind of then feed out from that in the kind of gender identity debate in terms of what's happening with parents and what they're being told and the kind of the implications kind of from there. Just start by just a little bit, as much as you're happy to, obviously we're talking about your son who's not here, but in terms of did he ever talk about being attracted to other boys, or has he gone kind of, is it just you knew and he's gone straight to identifying as trans? Kind of what was the before period like and what's the change?
Okay, so he certainly was not. I mean, people talk about gay boys being feminine. I used to say that and I don't anymore. And it was probably Helen Joyce that I sort of thought, no, she does it better. He's variant in the way he expresses his masculinity. So from being a young boy, he was the one that clambered out of his cot at a very early age. He's very determined, you know, certainly he's not in any way backwards in saying what he wants. So he's not really gentle in that sort of stereotypical way that you might expect. But his interests, I mean, where I live, the young lads all used to play out the back, and they used to have a bit of an argument about whether they would do cricket or whether they would do football. And my son went out there and said, let's do neither, let's put on a show.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know if I'm not a gay man, so I don't want to be saying anything that's like an offensive stereotype, because I've been accused of that before. But some things he liked baking, he liked girls, he didn't play with the boys. Something told me that I might have a gay son. So, and his father too. So we didn't really angst about it or think about strategies really, but we just did things like we would say, you know, when you talk about the future with your kids, and you might say, you know, when you have kids, when you get married, you know, when you meet a boyfriend, or we would say boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yeah.
So we signaled to him that it was perfectly okay because he wasn't going to know.
Yeah.
So we knew first. And he came out to me at age 11.
Wow.
And I said, yeah, that's not really a surprise. And then he went back upstairs. He had a friend who was upstairs with him, a girlfriend. And it was no big deal. And then unfortunately, at 14, he decided he was actually trans.
Yeah. So I want to come back and talk a bit about kind of gender nonconformity in kids and kind of where that relates here. But what was your sense of what led him to wanting to identify as trans? Or how much does he kind of explain that to you?
It's, well, obviously still lives at home and we're still quite close, even though he knows that I'm an unashamed TERF as far as women's rights are concerned. and the right of women to exclude males, any male, from female spaces. He wouldn't be surprised about that because I'm a feminist and he's got a house full of books, of which many are radical feminist texts. So I don't know. I mean, we're in mermaids territory.
Right.
I can't prove that anything happened at the school, but they did have an LGBT club. What I do know that he did was he went on Childline.
Mm-hmm.
And Childline, for those of you that don't know, is actually run by the National Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Children.
Yeah.
They run the Childline YouTube. I've done a series on the Childline YouTube because it is relentless about gender identity ideology. And I know that my son got it from there because he used to share like little YouTube clips from people that I know were on that website, and they were trans men usually, because of course you can usually tell a trans identified male as male, but the women who identify as male, once they're on testosterone, they can superficially, at least in an online setting, be very passive. And I know that I didn't know that these were female, but I now know that he was showing me all those to sort of introduce the topic to me.
Yeah. So kind of like letting you know without announcing it, kind of.
Yeah, I think I suspect he'd been looking at them for a while, and I know. So that's why I've done a really long series on Childline, because to me, they're really responsible for a lot of this.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to mention, for listeners, I'll link to Tish's blog in the description. So if you've not read, there's a wealth of really well written, kind of researched variety of topics relating to this, to kind of go and read up on there. So what was the kind of reaction, maybe is too strong a word, but kind of what was the kind of reaction and then the kind of follow on from the point at which he kind of said that he was identifying as trans?
Well, it's a long time ago now, so I can't remember. I certainly don't. There was no immediate, no, you're not, it's ridiculous. It was only when I really started to look into it that I thought, no, this is not, this is not right. This is not what's happening here. And what we agreed to do is we don't discuss it. So because the two times when we really, really discussed it, it ended up with both of us in tears. But then a hug, I love you, and we watch the film together. So we try and keep that relationship going, because I want to keep him close and I want to keep him as safe as I can. Yeah. So the initial reaction wasn't much. It was only when I started looking into it and I thought, oh no, this is gay conversion therapy.
Yeah.
And really regressive in terms of sex stereotypes.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of the things that, or typically from the stuff I've read and people I've listened to and whatever, but you can tell us how much this kind of reflects in your situation. So for a teenage male who's saying he's identifying because he thinks he's a woman, whether he thinks he's in the wrong body or he just thinks that he wants to identify as a woman, or however he's defining trans, the things that are kind of signaling that for those young men, boys, is the kind of sex-based stereotypes that we generally associate with or attribute to women or girls. So was that similar for him with you? Well, in terms of the things that did he recognize the sorts of things that you were talking about before, in terms of in himself, those are kind of potentially feminine or more girly, in quotes, kind of stereotypes?
I think, if you were to outline his interests, he associates more with girls. He likes baking. He likes a lot of music. That's all female artists. I don't think he's ever. I think there's one male artist that he likes. Everything else is women. And because I'm a feminist and I'm a reader, and we live in a household with quite a lot of discussion and debate, I think he knew very early on, he worked out that he couldn't tell me explicitly what made him a woman, because he knows I would, because I was the main earner in our household. His father, although his father was a rugby player, he's also in a female-dominated profession. He stayed at home when the children were little after I'd finished my maternity leave. So he doesn't live in a. I know he would know that he wouldn't get any credence for those arguments.
Yeah.
So it basically just says, I need to be my authentic self. This is how I feel. I can't explain it. It's just how I feel. And I said to him, I genuinely think the reason why you won't explain that feeling to me is because you know I will say that's a load of sexist nonsense.
Yeah.
And like I say, in order to keep the relationship as close as it can be, we kind of have a rule that we will occasionally discuss it. I also will send him, if there's any new medical research about the risk to his health, or if there's new detransitioned gay males coming out, I do reserve the right to tell him about those.
Yeah.
He never mentions it when he comes back home. He just says, let's put a Grey's Anatomy on.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, the we're seeing more now of the kind of male detransitioners who are typically gay. More, we've obviously, there's been high profile detransitioned women, but now men who are detransitioning back to identifying or no longer identifying as women. But there are fewer of those. But it makes me think in terms of the kind of question of role models. What kind of, I mean, it's been, I'm 43 next in a couple of months, so it's been a long time since I was A, that age, and then B, thinking about coming out. But thinking about the kind of gay role models and seeing men who were gay, what's that kind of landscape like for teenagers? Like, is it are there gay men that he, you know, in Maine would see as being gay men, or is that all a bit too fluid now?
Well, he will, because he knows, because although I don't use my name on Twitter, I changed it because of an incident that happened in terms of someone trying to find my son.
Yeah.
So I'm not a teenager, I'm not a gay male. So, but in terms of role models, when he knows that I think he's just a gay male, and he said to me, I am not a gay male, but I am a trans. I can't remember if he said girl or woman, or he may have just said I'm trans.
Yeah.
But there should be gay. There are gay role models, but how many gay male role models now are pushing gender identity ideology?
Yeah, because they're going along.
If he's finding those gay males, it's like being told you're not in our club, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you say about the LGBT club at school. So there wasn't that kind of thing when I was at school, or definitely not at my school. But I would have still have been aware of kind of, I suppose, more. In fact, yeah, I'm trying to think what kind of charities and what kind of organizations would I have been aware of. And I'm trying to think at what point would I have been aware of things like Stonewall, and it was probably more AIDS charities in the 80s that I would have been aware of first. But yeah, I'm thinking the difference now, like if Stonewall was still the Stonewall it was before, that's the kind of organization that would be somewhere that, particularly in this day and age where kids can go and look stuff up online, could go and find kind of information, reassuring stuff, you know, the whole "it gets better," all the messaging that Stonewall had for if you're realizing your sexuality as a teenager, that they just don't now. None of those organizations. I mean, that's why LGBT Alliance had to start up and is going to be setting up the helpline, because the Stonewall aren't there to do that job.
Well, my son actually never wanted to go to the LGBT club. I was worried about it. I knew enough even then to know that that would be a problem. But I also knew I couldn't say, no, you can't. But he didn't want to go because he's quite self-reliant, really. He goes to gigs all over the country by himself and has done. We always let him do that, even from the age of about He started going to gigs when he was about 14, and we even let him go when he was 15 to Ireland on his own.
Yeah.
Because we figured that would give him something else to focus on.
Yeah.
But I'll just give you an example. The charity that won a Pink News Award in 2019, it's called Intercom Trust. I've just done a piece on them because I've been periodically checking their site. They still haven't populated the frequently asked questions under sexual orientation.
Yeah.
And I think that's because they've got loads of trans content on there. I think they cannot populate that because they're too scared to use same-sex attracted. Because, of course, as we know, the new ideology calls that being a genital fetishist and being transphobic. So any source that he went online, he was going to get this messaging. And clearly he was looking online, and that's the messaging that he's arrived at.
Yeah. It's making me wonder about the kind of the context for parents today. We were talking a bit before we hit record about other people we know, and like I know someone who works in a school, and then other I think I've mentioned before that I've got nieces and nephews who are homeschooled, and I'm really glad they are. But in terms of the what was out there, what messaging were you getting as a parent, or what sources were you looking for or going to during any of this time? What are the messages parents are getting?
Well, if you look at, I've done a series on all the transgender guidance packs. All of that is, everything that's in the school is completely wrong. It's not good for gay kids at all. And what I didn't mention, which is a really pertinent factor for my son, was that because he was obvious to me and other people that he didn't conform, he was bullied at school relentlessly. And there's some really good research about the influence of homophobic bullying by your peers on gay kids, and it actually starts to impact their self-identity in terms of their gender identity, inverted commas. So that's a hugely important backstory. Now, my son knows that we went to school more than once, but he doesn't know we went as many times as we did. And I think he probably feels let down by the school and probably by us. And in retrospect, I wish I'd taken him out of school, and I didn't. And so I think we all, parents, we're not beyond reproach, and we all have that legacy of guilt of what did we not do? What did we not see? I mean, my son was called not just girl, but also the F word by another pupil in the school. Now, I got called up to school in that instance because my son lamped the person that said it to him, which I was kind of a bit proud of, really. But obviously, you have to go to school and say violence is not the answer. But I was appalled that had been said to him. But even when he was just being called gay, the school seemed to think that it was a reclaimed term.
Yeah.
And therefore, and I said to him, look, I don't care how many adult gay males have reclaimed that, and it's not when something's being directed at you as a pejorative. The actual trans exclusionary radical feminist is not itself a slur, but it is a slur in the way that it's used.
I think the bullying thing, I mean, at primary school, my bullying ended when I picked the kid up and threw him down a grass bank. But then in secondary school, it wasn't, for both in primary school and secondary school, it wasn't overtly to do with the fact that everyone knew I was gay, because I didn't. And I mean, by secondary school, probably some people did, I probably did, but it wasn't something I would articulate like that. And it certainly wasn't what the bullying was articulating at primary school anyway. But in secondary school, it was more of a, it was because of that, and it was referenced in things maybe, but it wasn't as overt. But so I think, maybe I think that's something that more gay men should know or should hear more about, in terms of because it's an experience a lot of gay men will have had, because for any reason that a kid stands out as being different or seems to be different for some reason at school, it's going to be a reason to target them for bullying. So I think that's an interesting one in terms of for gay men to think back about what the impact of the homophobic bullying that they faced might have if the answer to a kind of getting out of being in the category that's being bullied is to identify as something else, or do you know what I mean? That kind of
I think it's a deeply damaging experience, but it's more than that as well. Is that if the boys are distancing, even if, say, for example, he gradually started to have friends who were not all girls, but then you're known as to be a gay male and you're getting bullied, and the boys don't want to be associated with you because then they'll think I'm gay.
Yeah.
But then you're also, he didn't really have anything in common with most of the boys. I mean, I'm sure he would have done as they grew older, because you tend to be quite conformist, don't you, at certain points, and then when they get a bit older, they might, well, I'm going back to my day, it probably isn't the case now, but when we hit sort of like 13, 14 was when everybody started differentiating themselves, but it was in the age of like new romantics and punk, and you know, there were all the, and goths, there were all these different things that you could glomp onto. But now the only one you've got is whether you're one of these myriad of sexual identities, and gay seems to be the least favoured one because it's old hat. Yeah,
it is that kind of, it's almost that victim of its own success type, not quite that, but that kind of thing. It's so accepted. Obviously it's not entirely accepted. There's a lot of actual homophobia around, and more so in, you know, outside the UK and other countries, but it's so, for the most part, in the Western, in inverted commas, world, being same-sex attracted has got to the point of being normalized. You're a
cisgender white gay male, aren't you? You're practically the oppressor.
That's it. It's kind of, it's become, it's sad that it's kind of, it's almost overshot the where we were aiming for. Is that's for boys who are same-sex attracted, they're going to grow up to be great gay men. It's the gay is just, you know, boring or conformist, or like you say, you're part of the oppressor, particularly in the rest of the woke identity politics stuff that teenagers will be exposed to. That if you're in that oppressor group, there's that. Whereas then for girls, lesbian is a porn search term, and that's the lowest of the low. So I think more of the gay men, or all people, but particularly gay men, in the context of what I'm trying to reach, who are going along with the rainbow mafia, LGBTQ plus Stonewall mantras, would do well to think about what was the homophobic bullying that they faced, or experience of homophobia that they've faced, and what would that look like now? Because I think that's the key thing.
If you add the experience of homophobic bullying, all your friends are girls, you've got an ideology in the school that is teaching that you pick where you are on the gender spectrum, and you as a boy are further on the one that is seen as appropriate for females. And then you're navigating, you know, his friends started to have sleepovers, and naturally he's a boy, so he genuinely, for most of them, he would not be included. He was included in one because the parents knew him and knew that he was identified as gay, and they were obviously comfortable with it. I would never have pushed for that. You know, it's their right to exclude any male. And the funny thing about that was they sent him home with manually pierced ears. they pierced a hot needle and they pierced his ears. I mean, not as a cruel thing, as I think the other girls had it done. The girls who were there had it done. But that was lonely because they were doing things that he wasn't included in. And then the other thing that I think caused difficulties was women, generally speaking, don't like it when men get involved in their arguments, and sometimes it can be quite difficult to navigate the terrain. Like I don't always. My son sort of, my youngest one will sort of educate me about what moving through the world as a boy to man is. I've never experienced that, and I think that led to a little bit more isolation, because I don't think my son could navigate those female fallings out in quite the way that the other girls could.
Yeah.
And when he got involved in them, he ended up being the one that got isolated.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of loneliness in the mix as well.
Yeah. I think the way back about one of the things to talk about was that kind of idea of gender nonconformity for kids. Again, this is kind of an area you've written about and then written about the kind of the trans kids phenomena and the kind of TV and other things that have gone on around that. So I'm interested in that idea of stereotypes and just that kind of gender nonconformity, because in an ideal world, but in anywhere near an ideal world where we were getting towards with breaking down of gender stereotypes or sex-based stereotypes, that people can be anything. Particularly, I definitely remember at secondary school the kind of conversation about men who are in typically female jobs and vice versa, and the whole you back then you can be anything you want to be didn't refer to what gender you identify as. It was about whatever whatever job you want to do. There's not the restrictions on that based on what sex you are. And it felt like it's another thing that we've overshot almost.
We've definitely regressed, haven't we? I mean, I'm from a big family, Catholic. Father was very much a patriarch, very old-fashioned in lots of ways, but he was also an intelligent man. He was self-educated. We would debate lots of things. There was always books in the house. But we weren't even called tomboys, because we were just like every other girl in the neighbourhood, climbing trees, jumping off buildings, really non-conforming. And interestingly, my youngest sister, she's 7 years younger than me, so a big age range in our family. She made us call her Sean for 2 years. And we just went along with it, because in our house, the boys got the chops and the girls got the chores. So we just thought it was a very savvy move to avoid. But no one thought she was actually a boy. And she's not even a lesbian. She's a married heterosexual mum with 2 kids now.
Yeah.
And we just went along with it.
Yeah.
I bet loads of other kids have had similar experiences.
Yeah, I think it's a thing you said there about but we knew she wasn't a boy. I think that's the thing relating to stereotypes that, again, another thing I wish more gay men who are going along with it all stopped and really thought about is a kind of what was. I mean, there are stereotypes that are based in stuff that's slightly based in truth. That's kind of where they've arisen from. But the restrictive nature of attributing stereotypes to either being this is a boy's thing or a girl's thing. But even in situations in the past where, like you say, you were just doing whatever kids were doing, and even if a girl said she was a boy and used a boy's name, that didn't mean she thought she was in the wrong body, or that other people, it's the same as if your kid says, well, today I'm an astronaut, and you go along with it because it could be something different tomorrow, and they're not literally going to space. So it's that kind of the stereotypes that kids experience is an amount of, I mean, I'm not a parent, so I'm kind of talking slightly from experience with nieces and nephews and younger cousins, but maybe as a mum, you might have had more experience on this. The stereotypes that kids encounter, there's an amount of almost playing with those boundaries to see where they are. And kind of understanding themselves in the context.
That's quite a healthy thing to do, isn't it? If you're not going to sterilize yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, if you add in, if as a gay man you've been bullied and that bullying has taken the form of homophobic bullying, or you were just singled out for characteristics that you now know probably were indicative that you were going to be a gay man, then you add in that you've been taught all of this ideology in schools that if you don't conform, maybe you're not really a boy.
Yeah.
And then you look at stories. I've done a series on marketing the transgender child, and I think one of them is on Kai Sheppey or Shepley. So an American kid, the mum suspected the kid was going to be gay, and she openly says she was going to beat the gay out of him. This was not going to happen. She was a Christian evangelical. Kai is now a transgender, inverted commas, girl. And that mum is fated by LGBTQ groups across America. If that's not a stark example of trans in a way the gay, it's absolutely overt.
Yeah. And I think that's...
And the mum's getting loads of kudos out of it. And the difficulty is, parents like me, we're sort of invisible because we're not parading our kids for likes.
Yeah.
We're trying to protect our kids and keep them safe. So that's why you've got that asymmetric media coverage. You've got Victoria Derbyshire having trans kids on, and breakfast television having trans kids on. And you're not really seeing parents like me who are saying, hang on a minute, this is not right.
Yeah. From the stuff you've kind of looked into for what you've written about with like the Kai Shapley kind of example, and similar, what is there a consistent thread in terms of what is driving parents? I suppose that's more of an extreme, but in general, parents who are going along with it,
possibly they've got very traditional views about sex stereotypes. I think some have definitely come to it from like a queer theory ideological standpoint. It may be that ideological standpoint was there, and then they projected that onto the child. Some of them seem, I mean, some genuinely are trying. This is what they've been told, that their child will commit suicide. They're terrified. They've gone to the agencies and they've discovered that, oh yes, that means that my child is one of these children, and we must do this. Some of them, I don't have a blanket criticism for all the parents who are going along with this.
Yeah.
I do reserve my eye for the ones who are proselytizing it.
Yeah.
Because they're causing great damage, and some of them are making careers out of it.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a difference between kind of going along with it because you are genuinely just trying to find the best thing for your child, and you're being misinformed by the organizations and whoever that should be supporting you. And there's a difference between that and putting it onto a television show.
Yeah.
I think that's a key thing that I think you've either read or tweeted, or I've seen, I think you said about reminding any kids that are kind of going through a kind of a identity crisis to do with their gender, or just coming to terms with their sexuality, and if they are wanting to identify as trans and their parents aren't happy with that or comfortable with that, or even trying to just question, have a conversation with them, it's not because the parents hate their kids. For them, in nearly all cases, it's going to be that parents they love their kids and they just want them to be okay, and they want to help them find out what's going on for them to resolve it. It's not the narrative that you'll see the child snatcher on TikTok and those sorts of people, good old Jeffrey, talking to kids directly about, if your family don't want you or don't believe in you or whatever, we're here for you.
Well, that funnily enough, because I only found my son's medications last year, and that was because it was coming up to Christmas, and I genuinely, I don't invade his room. That's his personal space. But as usual, I'd left all Christmas preparations to the last minute, and he happened to have the vacuum cleaner. So that was a absolutely heartbreaking experience for me. And I very rarely cry, but I rang one of the butch lesbians that I know from Twitter world, although we do meet in real life, and I was incoherent because I genuinely thought he'd come out the other side. So it was a real massive shock to me. But we didn't want to ruin the Christmas.
Yeah.
And then, so we left it and we gave him opportunities to tell us. And when he didn't, we just sent we ummed and ahed about how to do it. And in the end, we just left a note basically saying, we know we don't approve, but please don't believe that we would in any way throw you out or this is always your home.
Yeah.
But the shocking thing was that I took photographs of all the evidence of, I still don't know who's prescribed to him, but I do know that, yeah, he got a referral on the 7th of November and the drugs had arrived before Christmas.
Yeah.
No counselling during a pandemic. So there's no way, because of the hours that he works, his dad takes him and picks him up. So we, he's, apart from his gigs, we're not helicopter parents by any means, because we do encourage him to do exciting things like go to gigs in different countries and things. But we would have known if he was going to any counselling, and he wasn't.
Yeah. I was going to ask, how has he arrived at having medication? But obviously you're not sure, or you don't know.
The only thing I can say with any certainty is that the same chemists that deliver to him are the ones that are used by Gender GP.
Yep.
I've kept all of that evidence and copied it all, because if there is legal action in the future when he realises that he's made a dreadful mistake, I mean, I message the GPs every week with new research, because they may not be prescribing him, but they referred him.
Yep. I guess this is another thing that again, anyone who's going along with all this, but particularly gay men who are going along with the kind of Stonewall line and Mermaids line, is that they don't get is how quickly things progress and how easy it is. Although there's waiting lists, and if you want to get an appointment at the Tavistock, or I know there are examples of where things will take longer, but it can be really quick. And if it's happening for a teenager who is, I mean, teenage years anyway, there's an uncertainty about yourself and the world. But if you're kind of trying to find out and establish what is going on with your identity, to have that shorter turnaround and that ease with which to get medication, that's me. I don't think most gay men or most people will realise.
If I ever say that on Twitter, I get called a liar.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that's the least abusive thing that gets said to me, but I've got copies of all the documentation, so I know exactly what the trajectory was. I think it's, but even for older, because Tulip, whose article is in the Daily Mail today, we spoke for an hour and a half a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I know he was older, but even so, and in fact, funnily enough, I mean, I should just say for clarity, I don't believe anybody is born in the wrong body.
Yeah.
And I don't believe in transgender ideology. Yeah. But I do actually know people who self-describe as transsexuals. Mm-hmm. And one of them, we've had a couple of YouTube conversations, and we do speak on the phone. And they have just reverted to re-identifying as male after 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I probably know, I mean, I admin a group for a transsexual. I don't know whether he would still call himself a transsexual anymore, but it's not as if I would probably know more in that community than my son would. Yeah.
Again, another thing that gay men, and anyone, but particularly gay men, will think that anyone who's kind of not just wanting to go along with it is opposing it because, we're hateful bigots, or, we don't believe anyone should be happy, or whatever it is that they're throwing at us. And it's not, it's like you just said, it's the reality of you aren't born in the wrong body, you are your body. But that doesn't mean that we think gender dysphoria isn't a thing, or that people won't have, even if it's not as far as gender dysphoria, have identity issues related to the stereotypes that are associated with either sex, and will need help and support with that. And we're not saying that you shouldn't get any of that, or even, well, I won't speak for you, but you can say if you agree. I would say even if, as an adult, the only way you can cope with really severe gender dysphoria is to present as if you were the opposite sex, fine. It doesn't mean you get access to the things that are protected for the opposite sex in terms of single sex spaces or whatever. But if that's how you cope as an adult, fine, that's up to you. But I think there's a perception from the other side that we don't want anyone to go anywhere near any of this because it's never the right thing. And actually it's that we want people to think about it and realize that, you know, in a lot of cases it's going to be, you're actually just going to grow up to be gay.
But you see that the really interesting thing is that I won't name them because they've reverted back to a male name now, but we would speak for quite a long time on the phone, and I'm radical feminist adjacent, let's say. I'm probably not as pure in heart, but we have really interesting conversations and we get on very well together, because actually a lot of feminism, my brand of feminism, not this new wishy-washy version, we do consider issues about, you know, what does gender, what's a sex stereotype, what's nature, what's nurture. All of those topics are things that transsexuals have ruminated on as well. So to me, it's not unusual that we would spend ages chatting about the same things. And obviously the ones that I know that I'm turfy and very much about women's single sex spaces. But we have a common humanity.
Yeah.
And actually, those have been some of the more stimulating conversations that I've had. And, you know, I don't lack compassion. You know, I'm not sure. Ultimately, we don't have enough research about whether there are shortened lifespans, whether there are health. I mean, I do know all the transsexuals are having horrible health conditions because they've been on hormones.
Yeah.
Now, so I would say, you know, I think if we had really solid long-term data, we would be really wary about anybody going down this path. But if you had that data and it turned out that for some people it could work out and we knew how to mitigate the negative health consequences, maybe there could be a subset of people that really, really cannot live any other way.
Yeah.
I'm kind of on two minds about that.
Yeah. I think it's part of the, it relates to the no debate stance that the other side has had, which I think is large now that it's kind of, they're having to have the conversation at least, or be interviewed publicly, or it's being more exposed. We know there's a big chunk of the no debate stance, apart from the kind of the deliberate kind of in secret lobbying element of the no debate. It's because they can't back up what they're saying. And that's the kind of the official kind of organizations and that kind of thing. People generally who are going along with it because they just support LGBT rights, or they want to be nice people. And again, particularly gay men, because they are less affected than women by this, more generally in terms of gender identity. But they're kind of going along with it and not getting into the conversation because they know, even if it's subconsciously, they know that if they start, and you can tell this when you start having the conversation on Twitter, and I've had this with people in real life, you get one or two questions in and they can see where that path of questions go, and they know they can't back up what they're saying once they kind of have to actually unpack it. And I think that's it seems like that's been a big reason not to have people not to have a conversation. But I'm really keen, and if people are listening to this and they know gay men they can share this with to listen, I would say those gay men have the conversation with people like us to understand we're not trying to be cruel. We're trying to prevent harm.
We're actually trying to do the exact opposite.
Yeah.
I mean, I did I didn't do a blog on it. I did a thread on it about a trans-identified male did something about DIY teens, about kids getting medications off the internet. Yeah. And I had assumed that one of the young females in that, who was scheduling a double mastectomy and was on testosterone, I had assumed that she was probably just a lesbian. Now, she actually DM'd me after that thread to say, I'm actually a gay man. I mean, it was a very polite, you know, and she just said, lol, logic fail, I'm actually a gay man. And I sent a kind reply, but said I won't retweet a correction on my timeline because the gay men that follow me are gender critical, but I hope everything works out for you. And then I had a quick look at a timeline. It was all about AIDS and Section 28. She was 19 and female.
Yeah.
And so that, I again, this was another one of those moments I thought, okay, now I thought it would be the sterilising of children. I thought it would be other thing, men taking women's political posts. But I thought, no, girls identifying as gay men, that's got to be a big wake-up call. But no.
Yeah.
That's, I haven't removed my earlier tweets. I did the talk for Women's Place UK and mentioned quite a lot of transsexuals, some of whom I'm still in contact with, some I definitely am not in contact with because they turned out to be orthogynephilic men.
Yeah.
And if you're ever in a space with orthogynephilic men and you're females, they can't help themselves. They have to keep pushing the envelope and breaching your boundaries. And actually that person that I'm thinking of, we had to remove him from a female group.
Yeah.
So that obviously that's not going to happen to men in the same way, because a trans man, a trans identified female is not going to be able to physically threaten you in any way.
Yeah.
As a general rule. So there's that different imbalance, isn't there? But you could find that certainly there's the boxer ceiling, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's quite a lot of abuse. I've seen a lot of abuse of gay men, and many of it using pejorative slurs that haven't been mainstream for 20 years.
Yeah. Yes.
So
and
there is a homophobia in there.
It feels like there's definitely it can even before the women and girls wanting to identify as men and then saying they're gay men thing, even before that, it's a conversation I've had with gay men about certain women fetishizing gay men. And this is beyond most gay men will have more female friends, and there are females who have more gay friends, and there are some women who are just more, they connect better with men, and then there's a safety in having male friends, all that kind of stuff. But then beyond that, there have been women who are essentially fetishizing gay men, and this feels like that's a big part of the women and girls identifying as men and as gay men and the way they talk about it, and it's probably accentuated in the kind of Twitter and social media space. But it's fetishizing gay men as a stereotype of gay men, and the way they talk about gay men, and it's almost that validation of being oppressed for the same reasons as gay men by being using those slurs and that kind of thing. And it's I don't think most gay men will have either seen it or realized how damaging that is.
And it's a difficult one for feminism, isn't it? Because we typically will focus on male paraphilias or male violence.
Yeah.
And then when I'm not a biological determinist by any means, but I do know that most sex offenders are men.
Yep.
And so then when you have a situation where it's actually females that are behaving in ways to gay men, that are unacceptable, you're going to get less of a voice on that. That needs to be a gay man topic, doesn't it?
Yes. I think because of there's, and again, I think I've referenced it in other conversations as well. And to your thing you just said about when we're talking about things, it's as a typical at a population level, men are typically at a population level physically bigger and stronger than women are typically at a population level. That doesn't mean there aren't women who could physically beat up a man, but for them, because of those population averages and typical population distributions, the impact of gender identity ideology is greater for women, because
it's almost like it's a tale of two sexes.
Yeah, it's that added physical threat that isn't there for men generally, but the thing that is, and again, I think this is something that will become increasingly, hopefully, well, I don't hope that it happens, but I hope that where it's happening, it increasingly becomes more apparent, is the sex by deception, that's kind of a worst case example, I guess, of the women who identify as gay men going into gay male only spaces like saunas or wherever, or being on apps, and essentially they're breaking the law.
Yeah, but you see, what's interesting about that is the only people that are being prosecuted for that are females.
Mm-hmm.
Under the sex by deception laws. I did a big piece on sex by deception.
Yeah.
And I did one on transgender dating, because obviously one of the things I said to my son was you're limiting your dating pool.
Yeah.
But so I did a piece on that. But what was interesting about that was the sex by deception cases are all what look to be probably lesbians. Or they are lesbians, are attracted to females, and for whatever reason they can't accept the sex. They are being prosecuted. But I don't think I know for a fact there is at least one female very publicly going into gay men's spaces, like sexual free-for-alls, because she publicly posts it on a Twitter account. So she's clearly having anal sex with men who may think, because actually she's very passing as a man, they may very well think that they're having sex with a man, but no prosecutions.
Yeah.
And again, if you think about the case of the murders of gay males, which I think is a scandal, and then now I know the Stephen, whatever his name is going to they're going to open that investigation again, aren't they, about the 4 males who were all.
Yep.
So again, there's a big issue about a lack of treating crimes against gay males seriously.
Yes.
So I'd be interested to know if anybody ever has tried to raise the issue. They may not have known.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a combination
of. I would be surprised if you see a prosecution.
Yeah, I think there's a combination of the crimes against gay men not being taken as seriously, or it's not seen as harm in a similar way to if a 15-year-old schoolboy has sex with a kind of a very young female teacher. There's it's seen as, or has been seen as, a well done him. Whereas if it's the other way around, that's obviously people more obviously see the crime there and the problem there. I think there's an element of that. I think there's also like you say, there'll be gay men who won't know, depending on what the situation it's in. If it's kind of a gay sauna or a gay club night of some kind that is a sex space, they're not necessarily going to check or know. But also, I think in a similar way to men who are raped not reporting it because of the perception or how they think they're going to be perceived and not reporting it, I think there'll be a combination of gay men not knowing, but also if they have known, they won't say anything because I don't think they'll be taken seriously, or they're going to be embarrassed.
I did see I didn't screenshot it, so I can't remember the source. I've definitely seen a conversation about a gay man and glory holes. Is that what they're called? And he discovered that whoever had done whatever to him was female, and just said, "Guess I'm not a gold star gay anymore."
Yeah.
And I don't know whether he felt violated by that. Maybe that's not the same. Men's reaction to that is not the same as for females. Yeah.
I mean, there's an element of you're going to stick your dick through a hole. You don't know who's on the other side. I mean, that's I guess. I think who's the comedian? There's a straight male comedian who has a whole bit about having gone to a sex shop. It's an American. Having gone to a sex store, he looked a lot older than his age. So at college, everyone sent him to the porn sex store to buy porn for them or something like that. But there was a different one he'd gone to, and there was like the little video booth, whatever they're called, with the glory holes in. And he was saying about how the store owner was telling him about it, and he was like, "But there's no one else here, and there's no other cars in the parking lot." So he kind of figured out that the only other person who would be on the other side was the guy working in the store. And he kind of said, for a minute, if he hadn't made that clear, I wouldn't have known. Like, would I have been bothered? So I think there's an element of men having maybe lower standards, but not feeling that as a violation in that situation. Whereas if you are in a situation where you are knowingly having sexual contact with someone who you think is male as well, and they're not, I think there's all kinds of not just violation things around for a lot of men, a lot of decent men anyway. I think there'd almost be a worry of, what's this woman going to say that I'm having sex with, and not knowing she was a woman? Am I doing something wrong as the man involved?
Yeah, well, you see, because that's another dimension. Well, two other dimensions that have just occurred to me that probably I need to cover is that I'm a big old movie fan. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that me and if he was ever off sick from work, we would always get George Cukor's The Woman, with the women, the very first film. Then we would watch the updated women, and so we watched a lot of romantic films, and and he probably is quite romantic and likes all of that sort of stuff. The only film he's ever told me that he's watched is God's Own Country, that gay love affair.
Yeah.
And that struck me, that he's not seeing depictions of like romantic relationships.
Yeah.
At all. And I don't know what, I'm sort of anti-porn from a woman's standpoint. I'm not going to comment on gay male porn. I think it's different and it's not my bailiwick, as it were. But he's not seeing any romantic portrayals, that would appeal to a teenage boy who might be a bit intimidated by adult male sexuality. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge thing, that you can talk about role models, but there's no positive depictions. I mean, I'm not saying that I object to the very raunchy sexual depictions of gay males, but for a young gay male, maybe that's not where you want to start.
Yeah, so if that's all you're seeing, or if that's the thing that you are seeing as being gay, is that, and particularly, even particularly if kids are seeing way much more porn because they've got access to it online. And I had this conversation with Kerry in another video about porn and the difference between gay porn and straight porn, and most gay men won't have seen a lot of straight porn, but there is a difference in terms of how harrowing they'd probably find it in terms of how women are treated in straight porn. It's either not there in gay porn, or there's more. I don't know if it's to do with there's more equality in terms of the physicality.
Yeah, it's more equal. So that I think that's why when I said it's not my bailiwick, it's because there isn't the same context of power imbalance.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there is extreme gay porn out there, and if that is easily accessible once you're online, that if that's what a teenage boy sees and thinks that's what gay is, then that's going to be something that you may definitely want to not go anywhere near.
I think there's an impact. I think for both the males and the females caught up in this, there is a sort of fear of the adult world, full stop.
Yeah.
And when you add in the fact that you've discovered you're a lesbian, and then you think lesbian is what being to see the porn, or if you're sexual female and you see the porn and the way women are supposed to accept being choked, and what better way to identify out of that than saying I'm non-binary or I'm a man?
Yeah. I think the kind of that changing, I mentioned before about how you're changing through your teenage years anyway, and the kind of understanding where you're at, and the kind of getting to the point of being in your 20s or later. And if you have gone through transition, whether that's just social, whether it's social transition through to full medical transition, and getting to the point where you realize you've made a mistake. Like you mentioned Tulip, we did record an interview with Tulip, but the sound was awful, and then there was dog barking, so we've decided to scrap it, and we've got to re-record it. But talking about even kind of going into like the day before surgery and having doubts, even if that wasn't necessarily how he would expressed it to himself. So I wonder how much. So thinking about the kind of relationship you have with your son with this is it's not just objecting and forcing. With teenagers, everything. If the more you say no, the more they're going to go for it, kind of thing. But that kind of, how much do you think there's in your son's case, but also more broadly, given that there's a backdrop of you can progress through this very quickly, how much do you feel there is a taking it trying to deliberately take it slower, or is there any of that, or how much is there a potential somewhere in the back of his head there is a what if I am just gay?
Oh, I mean, I hope. I dream of, find, not that marriage is the ultimate for every person, whether gay or straight. I mean, I only got married because it had difficulties for parental consent when my partner was the main carer. So we did we've been together forever, but we did a very unromantic, one sister there as a witness kind of wedding, just to, so I'm not a traditional in that way. But I do think, I would love to be the one giving a speech when he partners with someone and finds, because I don't think this is going to be it's not going to lead to romantic happiness at all. But I don't know. I mean, what I will say is that obviously we're still close. He doesn't use female spaces, and he never did, even because the school, when they were accommodating him at school, we obviously needed for him to be away from his homophobic bullies, was what I was thinking. But never to use female spaces. We made that really clear. And he still doesn't do that now. And I think he's aware, because we used to go to the pictures together, and he, generally speaking, would not want to be seen with me, which is fair enough. No teenage boy wants to be seen going to the pictures with his mum. But I did notice this one time when a man was standing outside the female toilets. There was no reason for him to be there. When I came out, my son was there with his arms crossed, just staring at this man, and was obviously keeping guard, because he thought, what's he doing there? So he's aware, I think. So the fact that he's respectful of female boundaries suggests to me that he knows there is a boundary, that he's not actually the thing that he would like to be. So I've got a bit of hope about that. Got a bit of hope because when we do discuss it, I am quite frank. If he opens up the conversation, and I don't lie to him. I mean, I'm never cruel, except that everything that you say that's against his ideology can be perceived as cruel. So I would, I cannot believe that this is going to be his end point.
I think the thing you mentioned there about it's not about being cruel, even though it can be perceived that way. I think anything that challenges the ideology can be presented as being cruel, because there's an assumed this is why you're saying it, and it kind of comes back to the why they kind of won't get into a debate or even discussion on stuff. And it's something I think I've talked to people about it, or maybe tweeted about it, but the idea of actually Peter Boghossian does it, the American academic, where he's got a series of videos where he's got like the central line, and then slightly agree, strongly agree in one direction, and then disagree, slightly disagree, very strongly disagree, like lines on the floor, and then you move. And I think it's what would it take for you to move one line closer towards the middle, not completely to the other side? And I feel like that's a position that the kind of strong gender identity ideology proponents can't even say what they do to move a small amount. So like we were talking before about whether someone transitions as an adult to cope with gender dysphoria, and whether that's a good thing or not. I think like if I were presented with sufficient medical evidence, like even if I was presented with sufficient medical evidence that you could be born in the wrong body, like if the evidence was there for that, I'm not going to ideologically say, well, you can't, but there isn't the evidence for that. And I think that's the difficulty.
If anybody publishes a paper, there is a paper. So obviously there is. I'm probably not going to be able to pronounce this correctly, but apotomophilia. Right. People who believe that their limb is not their own.
Yes. Yep.
And a guy in America did some research, kind of looking at whether there could actually be. I mean, I don't think that's obviously there's a social contagion element, but there have been people who felt this. Very strongly. And I'm not about to dismiss the fact that there are people who've worked. And he did some research wondering whether there was a mind-body mapping that had gone awry, and presenting some kind of therapeutic route out of it. And I managed to download the paper. First of all, activists complained about one section of it, so that was pulled, but I downloaded the paper. So I did a couple of blogs on that. So I thought that's promising research. I don't want to be on the wrong side of history if it turns out we just don't know enough. And there is something there. I'm not seeing it. And in that paper, he did say, if it was the case that this was biological, there is a higher corresponding rate of twins who identify as trans. But if they're identical, you'd expect it to be 100%. And it isn't. It's approaching something like, but I think it is high. I think it's maybe 40%, which suggests that it's sort of, I mean, the jury's out on nurture versus nature on a lot of things. I'm not a blank slate proponent, although I probably was before I had children. And I probably would have been quite vehemently. I'm exactly, which I kind of think you have to do as a woman to succeed. In, I was a senior manager, so I managed about 55 staff, and you have to have a certain self-belief to do that. And a lot of that is that you're not going to be told that you can't do something because you're a woman and you've got. But once I'd had children, it was so obvious that there was changes happening that were deliberately stimulating certain responses in me to make me an effective parent. And not that I'm saying I'm brilliant and I'm no earth mother. But I just want to pick up something that you said earlier as well about the other thing that I think that always makes me more sympathetic to people who are trans identified, not just homosexuals, but is that notion that there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. Now, we know about male propensity for crime. Still only a minority of males would seem to be the case. But I think as well, for a lot of males, that internalising that message, a lot of I did some work on detransitioners. I've done a few pieces on that and looking at the female detransitioners and the male ones. And a lot of the males, they kind of would have been superb allies to women.
Yeah.
Because they really hated that idea of men and they rejected it in themselves.
Yes.
So they were in flight from their sex.
Yeah.
Not for bad motives, not because they wanted to colonize females, but because they didn't want to be part of that class of men.
Yeah. And I think it's another example of the why I would want people who are going along with the ideology, or even just as they would describe it, the trans rights arguments, if they're going along with it and not questioning anything, it's what would it take for you to change your mind slightly? What would you need to see? And I think one of the things to consider for them to consider in that, and a message to share with people we're trying to peak, is the level of, it's not one reason. It's not, there's multiple things going on. Like you said, it's like that there are boys who are wanting to avoid this, what society is portraying as masculinity being toxic. I mean, there are elements of, or there are people who are toxic because of the way they are, but being masculine in and of itself is not toxic. But if that's what you're seeing and being presented to you in the same way, the girls who want to opt out of femininity and being female because of what's presented to them, there's multiple things that are going on for particularly kids and teenagers that who are arriving at, well, I'm trans as the answer, but there's lots of other things going on.
There's a lot of things going on because crudely you could say female don't want to be victims and males don't want to be victimizers. That's one narrative thread. Yep. And obviously then autistic.
Yeah.
And in fact, funnily enough, I years ago had a camping trip with a male. It was probably quite old to be coming on a camping trip with his parents, and I only knew him sort of very at a distance, but he's very nerdy, had long hair, but he liked heavy metal music, so it wasn't long hair like I'm a girl, hot long hair. Really into his computers, and it turns out that he has had the whole surgery done and is now suicidal. Yeah. And I'd say he was the Asperger's autistic victims. And the other thing, that if you think this is organic, you should look at the statistics for how many are same-sex attracted and bisexual, because it's stark, the percentages. But also, why are there only 0.58% kids in care and 4.8% at gender clinics.
Yeah.
That's unstable identity. So yeah, there are a myriad of, and not all of them are about abusive sexual fetishists, although that's an element.
Yeah.
Some of them are probably, well, the boys like mine, even straight boys like mine who don't want to be associated with males.
Yeah. And in amongst all of the different contributing factors to someone arriving at that the fact that there are all those things that would mean so even if, but I do think there is definitely a genetic component to maybe a predisposition to identifying as trans, in that there might, which even if you wanted to call that's innate, it's not the having that feeling maybe, but that doesn't physically make you the opposite sex. That's just a thing about your personality and your character. But I think even for all the different reasons we've been talking about that people could arrive at identifying as trans, that doesn't the fact that there are all those, that doesn't preclude the fact that, or the possibility for someone actually as an adult growing up and choosing to identify as trans and being accepted, not discriminated against because of that, as long as them, within boundaries we talked about in terms of the single sex spaces. I think that's the thing that people don't, again, gay men going along with it, don't get, is the fact that we're pointing out the, hang on, what if they're just gay? What if they're autistic? What if there are other issues going on? Doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a minority that where transition as an adult may be the right thing. But we just want to talk about it.
It is a regressive solution though, isn't it? If that innate predisposition is really, I'm not down with these stereotypes.
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're contracting out responsibility to change society for better for both men and women. And we're saying, oh, we'll just, these ones who can't hack it, we'll just medicalize them.
Yeah.
And don't forget, we're sterilizing them.
Yeah.
And ruining sexual function in many cases.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which people don't want to talk about. Yeah.
It's the permanent nature of things where people are going through a transition, and even before surgical, that there's a lasting impact of even social transition, but definitely surgical transition, that's permanent effects. But I think it's another example of, it's the reality people really know. It's like with the Supreme Court ruling in the US this week, overturning Roe v. Wade, and people talking about don't just talk about women, because there are trans men and non-binary women or non-binary females, this affects. It's like, because what a woman is, you're just adding other labels. People know what the reality is, but they're just, and
it's very dangerous for a society to be built on a lie.
Yeah.
It's dangerous on, I mean, obviously I suppose it's all the writing that I do about this is somewhat of a displacement activity. It's partly because I need society to change to save my son. Yeah. And also it's partly because I feel like I'm doing something. So whatever he does, but if he does detransition, I will be able to say I never stopped fighting for you. I did all of this because I love you.
Yeah.
But I'd be lying if I said I don't also find it fascinating from an intellectual perspective in terms of a societal phenomenon, how big money has driven this through, how institutions have been captured, how the charity sector just moves people around and spreads this ideology, how it's an elite project that's making us not look at other societal ills, climate change, economic inequality. We're all being divided up into these little micro identities, which is stopping us seeing that billionaires are ruining the planet.
Yeah. And you've nicely listed all the things that I haven't got around to talking to you about in this one, but we should definitely come back and do as a part 2 another time, because there's so much more that you've written about that I'd love to chat to you about, including the things you just listed there. So thank you for this. It's been really interesting. you've shared a lot of personal stuff, which is I'm really grateful for that. And hopefully this is something that people can share with other people, particularly with gay men, whether they're gay men who are thinking about transition or just gay men who are going along with it, that they can find this useful to at least start to think about, what if I'm not 100% right? Not even come over to our side and agree with us. Just what are the things?
Is there a niggling doubt? Can I just add as well? Mm-hmm. Any parents going through this, my DMs are always open on Twitter, because I might have parents who need to talk to me. You can also join Bayswater Support Group, which is for parents, and Our Duty. They're both groups in the UK, and Our Duty has a branch in Australia and New Zealand.
Great. I'll put links to all of those and to Twitter and to your blog and everything in the description. So do follow those links if you are listening to this, and go and find out more. Thank you, Tish, so much for this. It's been great. Thank you, everyone, for finding us. Please do like and subscribe. It does something with YouTube I don't fully know, but please do that, and do share this with other people, because I want these to be useful. Like Tish was just saying about the, wanting to be at least doing something, so that you can say to your son that you were always fighting for him. We can't all fix everything, but we can all do something. So please do. I hope these conversations are useful and that they are shareable, so that you can kind of introduce kind of friends and family and whoever else to some of these issues. So that's been great, and we will.
Thank you,
Tish. I'll chat to you again soon, I'm sure, on Twitter. And thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again soon for another conversation.
Thank you very much.